This video has been brought to you by NordVPN. As it becomes easier and preferable to enjoy the movies and shows we love through the comfort of our own homes through one online service or another, there are two things that have become major growing concerns among many modern internet users: privacy and freedom. As some of you might know because I mention it on occasion, but as a mysterious villain on the internet, I'm a big fan of VPNs. And I've personally been a user of NordVPN for quite some time. NordVPN hides your IP address and secures your personal data from all those vicious little devils looking to collect your vital information. Also, never miss your favorite content, even when on the go, by changing your virtual location to one of over 60 countries. To summarize, with NordVPN, hide your IP address, protect your personal data, secure your privacy, and retake your online freedom by unlocking worldwide access to everything from sports to movies, even when traveling abroad. And I'm a big fan of freedom. And speaking of freedom, Nord is turning 10 years old, which means it's special offer time. Anyone who signs up in time for their birthday deal can get Nord's 2-year plan plus a month free along with a very special gift. You won't see this deal just anywhere, so check out the description below to try NordVPN's exclusive birthday offer risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, on with the video. Disney Star Wars is just the gift that keeps on giving. To quote the great C-3PO, here we go again. Now let's debunk some happiness. Star Wars The Force Awakens was supposed to be the fresh reawakening of a legendary franchise for a whole new generation of Star Wars fans. The keywords here being "was supposed to be." The bold first step into a bold new future, starring the initial chapter of a bold new trilogy, would arrive with a presentation of flashy effects and talented musicians, but an overall empty narrative, and worse, an even emptier protagonist in the form of Rey. But Rey is full of character, some might argue. We'll see about that. Unfortunately, Rey is the cursed product of the representation school of writing, a politically correct way of saying self-insert fanfiction, which means her whole role in the film isn't growth, but just being awesome. Representation media is the hip, woke writing fad Disney used to write its trilogy and create Rey's character arc. But what's equally unfortunate is that Rey's character arc was crafted by writers who mistook power growth for character growth. In short, under the rules of representation, Rey never had the chance to develop into an actual character, but instead doomed to be a shallow representation of shallow audience members who'd rather forego discovering meaning from Rey's story in exchange for taking validation from the mere existence of Rey. The "you are powerful because the fictional character who shares the same superficial trait as you is powerful" is a core characteristic of the rather pathetic, woke method of writing. A method for people who have forgotten that heroes were always meant to inspire us, not be us. Story-wise, this meant that Rey never had the chance to grow. She began the story as a strong, independent woman with no actual flaws, who just discovers that she's already awesome, because requiring Rey to improve would mean she wasn't perfect. And since she was written as an avatar for female audience members, giving Rey flaws and imperfections would be sexist. The true goal not actually being inspiration, but validation. So, how might Rey's journey look if we focus less on representation and apply more traditional story technique? There's this myth that floats around angry mainstream writers that male fans hate totally awesome female characters like Rey because these fragile men are just intimidated by strong, independent women, which is actually pretty hilarious because it reads more like someone trying to make themselves feel better after being dumped or something. Kind of like that episode of Frasier where Frasier gets rejected by a woman he liked and comforted his wounded pride by saying, "Well, you know what I say? Her loss. Her loss. She doesn't know what she's missing. He was just intimidated by me." See? Same energy. And it's extra funny when you remember that Rey is written as a stand-in for these women. But let's see if that intimidation theory remains true after we tweak Rey's character a bit with traditional writing elements. But what exactly do I mean by tradition? Well, in this instance, I'm referring to the tradition that the original Star Wars trilogy made famous and the theory that, in turn, helped make Star Wars the powerhouse it would become: the hero's journey. The timeless monomyth talked about in Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, and what made the monomyth so unique was its universal nature. The one story that crossed time and culture because it focused on the one true story of humanity, because the hero's journey at its base is the journey of maturity, which is probably why Disney needed to flee tradition, subvert expectations, the way it did, since they were writing for an audience that doesn't want to mature, but instead be praised for who they are. You know, after they're done adulting for the day. The journey of growth was a foundational element of the original Star Wars trilogy, but it was notably one Rey didn't have to make. Where Luke Skywalker suffered and sacrificed to attain the wisdom and power he possessed in the original trilogy, Rey was simply handed power, and no discussion on themes or deeper meanings will magically change an unearned power to an earned one. A devastating blow to a Star Wars story, since all the precious theme and meaning the haughty art majors wet their pants over are normally found in the journey itself and the trials the character faces. Again, this is a journey Rey seems to skip due to some elitist notion that traditional storytelling is no longer good enough. So, changing as little as possible, let's reintroduce the dreaded specter of tradition back into Rey's character, and, for better or worse, see what happens. So, how do we de-wokeify Rey's character? Well, the simple answer is, we treat Rey like absolute garbage, instead of writing her like absolute garbage. Because in the world of men and epic heroes, that's exactly what you are until proven otherwise. While I could list numerous changes to The Force Awakens, for the sake of clarity, we'll stick with just one significant alteration to Rey's character. One solitary instance where we switch from the pretentious, self-indulgent I hate you dad style of writing Disney Star Wars seems to have gleefully adopted, and apply a traditional element we find in the hero's journey. However, Rey doesn't actually need to be defenseless nor entirely useless, just not max level. She needs room to grow, or more specifically, she needs room for her character to grow. But before we get to our change, let's go over 2 points from the original Force Awakens movie. Point 1. In the original, when Finn first meets Rey, she's fighting off thugs who work for Unkar Plutt, after she refused to hand over BB-8. Finn, being a man who's been trained in the ways of combat since childhood, rushes in to protect Fair Lady, only for Fair Lady to beat up the hardened thugs and save herself, stealing away Finn's shining moment and reducing him from valuable companion to pathetic joke. In other words, the writers were so invested in making sure Rey was so totally cool, you guys, that they didn't even let her have a character, let alone character growth. Remember, power does not equal character, and a powerful character isn't inspiring just because they're powerful. And also, keep this first interaction between Rey and Finn in mind. We'll come back to it in a bit. And speaking of Rey's character, point 2. In the original, Rey canonically remains on Jakku because she hopes her parents might return someday, an aspect of Rey's already dangerously shallow character that Disney writers only utilize to shoehorn in the old friends can be your true family cliche. Except these writers just drop the cliche bare bones, as if they had just discovered the idea and walk away feeling brilliant, like someone bragging how they've invented the wheel at an auto show. Some might argue that Rey's desire for her parents, as presented in the movie, is her motivation, but since it just causes Rey to sit around Jakku for years actively avoiding adventure, it's really more of a paralytic, and that's why this will be our one alteration. Rey can stay an antisocial scavenger who lives alone, she can keep her apparent desire to leave Jakku one day, and of course, Rey can keep her aching desire to see her parents. Most everything remains the same, except we'll make Rey's need for family into her core wound, her character core. The core wound is a pain that motivates the character into action, usually so they can heal or avoid the pain. For example, Bruce Wayne's core wound is the murder of his parents. That pain motivated him to become Batman so that no other child would have to endure what he went through. Or, to keep this Star Wars centric, Anakin's core wound was his mother's loss. He became so afraid of losing someone else he cared about that he sided with evil in the hopes of finding the power that would prevent his wife from dying. So how does making Rey's need for family into her core wound change anything? Well, as mentioned before, the core wound is a driving pain that the character wants to heal or escape from, just like how most people probably wouldn't sit around after being caught on fire. So our new version of Rey still wants to see her parents, but now their absence has left behind a pain Rey desperately wants to escape from, the pain of abandonment. This pain motivates our Rey to actively seek her parents out, rather than lazily waiting around for a story to happen, while the original version of Rey simply chose to stay on Jakku while apparently having the skill to leave and access to ships. To quote Rey, "I've flown some ships, but I've never left the planet." Our version of Rey only stays on Jakku because she lacks the means to leave. So our Rey scavenges to both earn the means to survive and gather enough supplies to build/pay for her own ship. By the by, this would also organically motivate Rey to study piloting and brush up on ship mechanics. And when Rey sits outside with her helmet on looking up at the sky, this isn't hinting at some minor dream she refuses to follow. Rather, it becomes a moment of determination, Rey imagining the day she finishes building her ship to finally begin the search for her parents. Give more narrative weight to Rey's introduction, other than scene after scene of, look how lonely she is. But the core wound doesn't just giveth, it also taketh away. While the pain drives Rey to seek out her parents, it has also left behind damage. Damage in the form of a flaw. Despite Rey having spent most of her life on Jakku, we never see a single person who we could call her friend. Why is that? In the original, it's just because Rey needs to be lonely. Probably because Disney was salivating over the whole reject family, embrace comrades theme. But in our version, Rey feels the pain of abandonment. Being left and forgotten by those she trusted most shattered her faith in people. Our Rey believes it's better to live alone than place trust in someone else who would likely break that trust. After all, if her parents, the people who were supposed to care for her most in the entire galaxy, abandoned her so easily, why go through the effort of trusting anyone else? And her distrustful nature sows animosity between her and the other residents of Jakku. Most people actively dislike Rey, and her distrustful perspective becomes a character flaw. With a lack of a social life, Rey devotes most of her time to developing skills like piloting and mechanics. Movie-wise, we would see her working on a ship, collecting ship parts, or gathering money. And this would explain why Rey takes such a quick personal liking to BB-8. She may dislike people, but understands the loyalty of machines. A common occurrence with people who don't like people. They tend to choose companions whose devotion is more reliable. Leon had his plant, John Wick had his dog, even the legendary Grinch had Max. This would also make Rey's encounter with Unkar Plutt more significant. Why? In the original, Rey is bribed by Unkar Plutt to hand over BB-8. Rey considers the bribe, but eventually refuses a big pile of food for the droid he just met a few moments ago. A droid she was going to walk away from until he begged Rey to take him along. All because she's nice and awesome and literally you right now. But really, it feels more like the Dungeon Master told her that BB-8 was important to the plot or something. Our Rey will be faced with a character conflict. Will she take Unkar Plutt's bribe, which in this case means gaining the money or the parts needed to finally complete her ship? She could finally leave Jakku and seek out her parents, which means, in our version, instead of simple greed, Unkar Plutt is tempting Rey with everything she's ever wanted. An end to the project she has spent most of her life working to complete. And all it'll cost is a small droid she had just met a few moments ago. But Rey still refuses, except this time, her refusal stems from her core wound. Remember, our version of Rey lost her trust in others because she felt abandoned and betrayed by her parents. Her entire personality has been defined by that sense of betrayal. How could Rey now abandon someone, anyone, who placed trust in her, even if that someone was a lowly droid whom she just met? Out of the 4 heroic virtues, Rey's refusal would show us her strong sense of justice, a sense of fairness, and betraying BB-8 would be a terrible injustice. So not only would the relationship between Rey and BB-8 be forged by virtue rather than plot convenience, we as an audience can catch a glimpse of Rey's virtue, her nobility, because now we've seen when put to the test, our Rey is a just character, one who would put morality over her own desires even for the sake of a stranger. Now we come back to Finn and Rey's first meeting. In our version, Unkar Plutt still sends his men after Rey and BB-8. We can even still have Rey defeat a number of Plutt's lesser henchmen. After all, it'll show the audience that Rey is capable in a fight. But in our version, Plutt has a special group of henchmen that he only calls on in desperate times, likely because they're so expensive. And having the First Order breathing down your neck to retrieve a droid containing vital information might be a good example of a desperate time. So Plutt calls on a group of ex-Imperial stormtroopers to stop Rey and bring him BB-8. Contrary to the whims of the Disney writers, Rey doesn't suddenly summon the combat skills to match men with military training. Instead, she gets beaten. She gets beaten badly. This is when our version of Finn not only finds Rey, but also comes to her rescue. But for real this time, Rey doesn't magically save herself. No divine intervention, or touchy-feely nonsense about unleashing the hidden power inside yourself or something. Rey is stomped to the ground by former stormtroopers like when Luke Skywalker was stomped to the ground by Tusken Raiders. And then Rey is saved by Finn, like Luke Skywalker was saved by Obi-Wan Kenobi. See? It's like poetry. It rhymes. Next question might be, can Finn defeat a small group of ex-stormtroopers? Well, this is where Finn could shine. Show us a few of his own virtues. Where our version of Rey exemplifies justice, perhaps our version of Finn could exemplify fortitude. Finn is a former stormtrooper himself, formerly of the First Order, but he had fortitude enough to break his First Order conditioning and choose his own destiny. And now fortitude enough to endure a battle against a small group of former Imperial stormtroopers. Finn might not be able to completely defeat the stormtroopers, but maybe he can fend them off long enough for he, Rey, and BB-8 to escape. Now here's the reason I place so much emphasis on the moment Finn and Rey meet, because in our version, Rey undergoes a crisis of character. After a lifetime of mistrust, Rey must either place trust in Finn, a complete stranger who just saved her life, or stand alone against an enemy she cannot defeat. Of course, Rey will side against her own better judgment and align with Finn, which gives us an interesting dynamic. Finn becomes the muscle, while also bringing his expertise on the First Order, having been a member for most of his life. And where Finn spent most of his life around combat and tactics, Rey spent most of her life around machines and ships. So, when Rey and Finn make their escape from Jakku on the Millennium Falcon with First Order pilots in hot pursuit, maybe it is Rey piloting the ship, but it is Finn's knowledge of First Order tactics and weaknesses that help Rey outmaneuver a squad of trained pilots who would otherwise shoot her down in minutes. To put it plainly, each character now has their strengths and weaknesses, and each has their role to play. So, in our version, Rey and Finn are more of a team, rather than an all-powerful Mary Sue and her pet idiot. Instead, we see Rey face down her own flaws and insecurities, because now she has some. Without changing much of the original story, we see her tested, and through these tests we, of course, see her weaknesses and also her virtues. We see Rey's heroic potential when she rejects everything she's ever wanted because taking Plutt's deal and betraying BB-8 would be unjust. And, more importantly, we see her grow as a character, taking that important first step toward overcoming her crippling mistrust of people by choosing to trust Finn. It's these organic character moments which stem from the very core of a character that brings the character to life. And it's those moments of great personal strength and greater personal sacrifice that make such a character inspiring and eventually forge that character into a hero Disney tried so desperately to tell us Rey was. But it never felt true. Rey was given power she never ever earned. If the plot needed someone to be a pilot, Rey became a pilot despite never even hinting that she was one. Like she just switched character classes in the middle of a campaign. When Rey is captured, she simply manifests force abilities to free herself. When she was locked in battle with Kylo Ren, she somehow defeated a man who had years of training versus her zero training, simply by becoming stronger. She didn't earn her victory through cleverness or cunning, no special insight or strategy. She just closes her eyes, and when she opens them again, she's strong enough to win. And because Rey is just handed the answers to her problems, we never get to see her virtues or merits. She never earns her victory. Like a dad helping out his child with her math homework, but he just does every problem for his kid and sends her off to school to claim all the credit. And so, every so-called achievement for which Rey claimed credit lacks credibility. In the words of Dan Attias, a 37-year award-winning veteran of the film industry, this issue about how to make the moment credible brought me to this realization. In a story, you can want specific things to happen. You can say that they happened, and you can do your best to justify why they happened. Bad drama is filled with false moments in which characters go through transformations that have not been earned, with false insights and false feelings ramrodding the story along. Credible, character-defining moments like the story of the man who has everything, where Superman found himself in a fantasy where his home planet still existed, his parents were alive, and he had a loving wife and children, everything he ever wanted, only to tell his imaginary son goodbye and leave the fantasy forever to save his friends from certain death. Or when Zuko finally gained everything he'd been striving years to acquire, reclaiming his lost honor, returning from exile, earning the respect of his father. All the things he wanted so badly, Zuko would hire an assassin to make sure he could keep it. However, in the end, he turned his back on his own personal paradise because it was built on a lie. The lie that his nation's enemy, the Avatar, was dead. A lie that would ultimately cost him the respect of his beloved Uncle Iroh. And Zuko learned that paradise is nothing without honor. The hero's journey is a grand tradition that follows a hero on their journey to greatness, but at first requires a credible character and room for that character to grow, which essentially means that the character must possess a flaw or internal conflict that they must eventually mature away from. To quote Joseph Campbell, it's a going and a return that the hero's cycle represents. But then this can be seen also in the simple initiation ritual, where a child must give up his childhood and become an adult. Has to die, you might say, to his infantile personality and psyche and come back as a self-responsible adult. It's a fundamental experience that everyone has to undergo. Instead, people fell in love with the idea of Rey. She became champion to those who reject that fundamental experience. Rey never has to earn. She never has to grow. She simply is. Her journey is just discovering how awesome she already is. The perfect hero for a childish audience seeking validation over everything else. One can say she has a character, and you can do your best to justify the presence of that character. But that's not the same as creating the feeling you get when watching authentic, deep character moments. Throughout The Force Awakens, Rey never changes. No wisdom earned, no sacrifice, compromise, no credible growth. Dan Attias perfectly identifies what makes Campbell's hero's journey so timeless and its tradition so powerful. The hero begins his journey ignorant, vulnerable, and weak, the young farm boy who would make easy prey for the vile dragon. It's seeing his journey and following the farm boy through his road of trials as he learns how to wield a sword, ride a horse, hold a shield, undergo severe tests of character that we watch him earn his knighthood. So when he finally faces down the evil dragon, we know that farm boy, now turned knight, wasn't handed his power. We watched him earn it. And when he slays the dragon and saves the princess, his victorious moment feels credible. In other words, the entire hero's journey is the blueprint to making a credible hero that travels an incredible journey. But Disney wanted to subvert expectations with their precious new character and ended up giving us no character at all. So, do male fans dislike Rey because we're intimidated by her? That's up to you, but it just sounds like cope to me. Disney wanted so desperately to give us a powerful female hero who would inspire little girls, but unearned power and gifted strength aren't inspiring on their own. What the hero's journey teaches us is that power comes at the end of the road, and what the Disney writers failed to realize was that maybe true inspiration comes from the challenges we face along the way.